welcome back to Misfit Media. I'm your host Delta and my pronouns are Viva Vis. And because Trans Day of Visibility is coming up, in this episode I will be going over some of the most common myths about transness and trans people. But before we get into it, I have a life update for you. Skip this if you don't want to listen to some heavy mental health stuff. I have not been doing well mentally at all. I'm pretty sure I mentioned it on the podcast before, but because I am disabled, I'm quite isolated. I don't really see anyone outside of my house. I mostly around my partner. I don't have friends in person here. I'm trying to find online friends to talk to. And it's bringing out my borderline so bad, because meeting new people is hard, because with my partner at least I already have all that trust built from years of relationship. But with new people I don't, and my mood is so dependent on other people, which is honestly kind of ridiculous and pathetic, and people don't want to talk to me. It's weird, it's really impossible, because I've heard people say stuff like, I care about you, I consider you a friend, or some lying bullshit, and then they never reach out to me. Everything is always on me, and it's been like that with all my friendships I've had in my life. And this is also bringing back a lot of trauma for me around friendships, because I've had in-person friendships before that stopped happening essentially because the person just ignored me for days and also pretty much abandoned me in a grieving situation where I was grieving a family member. It's always fucking one-sided, because people claim they care about me and they don't, or people talk to me in a way that feels like it's designed to shut me up, where I just end up running out of words and I have nothing more to say. So what the fuck have I ever done to be that annoying that people immediately need me to shut up or don't even bother to talk to me, and then have like fucking hypocrites tagging me online in some random tag your friends bullshit. So I'm good enough for like some tag your friends fucking bullshit, but I'm not actually good enough to talk to. And it's hard because, as I said, I'm very isolated. My partner is more privileged than I am, so I always feel the need to have some people in my life who share some experiences in regards to gender or orientation, disability, and all that stuff. It's impossible, and then trying to meet new people is just always ends up with me hurt. I'm definitely more stable when I'm not trying to meet people, but then I will just end up being very lonely. And yeah, honestly, I just hate life. Yeah, I don't want to be here. I'm not gonna do anything. Trust me on this one. I will stay, because I'm hanging on by a tiny little thin thread. But that thread is very unlikely to rip, because it's the thread of me being terrified of dying in a painful or horrible way. Cheery life update, I know. I'm sorry. So let's get into some trans myths. Myth number 1. People know that they're trans from a really young age. This is kind of the narrative that's often pushed in the media, but that's actually not how most trans people experience it. A lot of trans people know that something's going on as a child, but most of them can't actually put the words to it. And some trans people don't know what's going on until they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s. There is no age limit to realizing that you are trans, and especially with else genders, it's even harder to figure out, because there's no concept in our society that's already being taught to small children. Myth number 2. Trans people identify as trans for political reasons, usually in order to either escape misogyny or escape the responsibility of male privilege. That is not how identity works. Being trans is obviously inherently political, but that does not mean that our identities only exist as political statements. They are also private, personal identities. And trans women and male assigned at birth else gender people never had male privilege. Trans men and female assigned at birth else gender people don't actually escape misogyny. Myth number 3. Dysphoria is the defining trait of transness. That is not true. Sure, for some people it is, but for some people transness is more defined by gender euphoria or by literally anything else, and also there are trans people who do not experience gender dysphoria. Being trans should not be defined by suffering. Myth number 4. Trans people can't be straight. This is kind of rooted in the idea that trans people are gay. Transness is often seen as like double gay, which doesn't even really make sense that people are raised straight trans people, because the usual narrative is kind of a gay man or a lesbian, quote unquote, comes out as a trans woman or a trans man. But then technically, if their orientation does not change, they would be straight, but that possibility is kind of erased. It's also erased because people often use the word straight as the opposite of queer, and because trans people are so obviously queer, straight trans people are often erased. Myth number 5. Trans is short for transition. And with transition, people usually mean medical transition. And that's not true. The trans in transgender simply means on the other side of, in this case, on the other side or on another side of your assigned gender at birth. It's not short for anything. It's just a Latin prefix, and not all trans people can or want to medically transition. Myth number 6. Trans people are of a third gender. This often comes up when people talk about men, women, and trans people, which is also still often something that comes up in like surveys when the gender options are man, woman, and trans. That's not how it works. A lot of trans people are men or women. A lot of us aren't. But trans itself is usually not a gender, but a gender modality, meaning it doesn't describe your gender itself, but how you relate to your assigned gender at birth. A cis man and a trans man have the same gender, but they have different gender modalities, which shape their experiences of manhood. Myth number 7. All trans people are binary. This is also not true. A lot of trans people are not binary. There are a lot of trans men and trans women who are partially men or partially women. There are also trans people who are completely removed from the binary. Trans simply means that your gender is different than what you are assigned at birth. This does not mean that all else gender people identify as trans, but it does mean that transness is not limited to the gender binary. And this have been all the myths about trans people and transness that I will get into today. I hope that if you are trans, you will have a good trans day of visibility. If you enjoyed this episode or even the entire podcast, please consider giving it a 5-star review wherever you can do that. For everything else, such as the podcast transcripts, my social media, the Misfit Media Discord, sending me an anonymous question, sending me a voice message, my email, or Misfit Media subscriptions for bonus episodes, all of that will be in the link tree of this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, be safe.